This is a presentation to fulfill two objectives. One, for the content engineering course I'm taking at Texas A&M University for my doctoral program, and two, to evaluate a book called The Fundamental Five, which is being used to improve classroom instruction in the coming school year. I've read the book The Fundamental Five and done some significant research on its purpose, and it raises a number of questions. Accountability seems to be a primary focus, while it neglects socioeconomic status. The role of the engaged parent is not addressed in this book. The book assumes a flawed classroom without ever considering that the system may be flawed that produces that classroom. Communications, all of the products that we have on the market today for 21st century communications are not even considered in a classroom at all, which is really part of our learning environment in the 21st century. And fundamentally, the question it always raises is, how does what I do in the classroom prepare a student for the workforce? The Fundamental Five does not consider socioeconomic status as a critical factor in what happens in the classroom. However, in a book that was used in a course at Texas A&M this past year, basing its work and some of its assumptions on the Equality of Education Opportunity study of Coleman, Campbell, and Wood and others in 1966, it says that he found that the differences in pupils' achievement among schools was associated largely with one factor, the socioeconomic status of students. And what's more surprising is that this has been supported throughout the years through numerous studies. What is of concern of this is that the Fundamental Five references Schmoker's book, The Results Now, and when I read Schmoker's book this summer, this came from his introduction only, and he references nothing to make this assumption. I'm surprised that the Equality of Education Opportunity Act is neglected in any of these works, simply because it was part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and should be recognized. Upon further reading of the Fundamental Five regarding socioeconomic status, this is mentioned on page 12, but when I started reading in pages 31 and 32, it seems that the authors directly contradict themselves, explaining that socioeconomic status is a strong predictor of student performance, and poverty is known to have a depressing effect on student achievement. Because there were contradictions regarding the significance of socioeconomic status, I decided to read the Equality of Educational Opportunity Act, and I was able to find a scanned copy, and I believe this came from the Library of Congress, although it is a scanned original. I've included some excerpts here to support the notion that socioeconomic status does have significance in the classroom. And clearly, reading through the document and the statistics, it's quite long. It's about 790 pages. It does have one excerpt that I thought was worth mentioning here. And it says, with some notable exceptions, Oriental Americans, the average minority pupil, scores distinctly lower on these tests at every level than the average white pupil. I thought that was interesting and furthered a little more research. The Fundamental Five makes a vague reference to Malcolm Gladwell's best-selling book called The Tipping Point, and Schmoker actually includes this in his bibliography in his book Results Now, so he used it as a reference. The interesting point about the tipping point, it does go into great deal about how people perform because of their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, and the like. One of the quotes from the book is, "No one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich." This is an Oriental proverb that relates to the work ethic of that workforce, and he frames it in the context of why Oriental Americans tend to score highly on math scores, and one of the reasons they come from a tight family environment. He further explains that these cultural legacies have deep roots and long lives, and they are developed over thousands of years. The point is, socioeconomic status and family background do have a direct and abiding impact on student performance. As we were visiting our grandkids in Tyler, we happened to go to the library because they read a lot and check out a lot of books, and this sign was sticking out in front of the library in the flower bed. 1 in 3 adults cannot read this sign. I thought this was something that could not possibly be true, and just there to arouse interest to read more books. I then took that phrase and Googled it with my iPad while I was in the library and found out that this was a quote attributed by the Literacy Texas organization, which is in Fort Worth, Texas, that says 1 in 3 adults cannot read this sentence. They attribute this phrase to the National Assessment of Adult Literacy in 2003. And I looked at that, and what I found about the quote was that the socioeconomic status is chronicled in about a 177-page scholarly review from the Department of Education that supports the notion and other notions that 1 in 3 adults cannot read that sign. I found this disturbing. All of this data I'd been taking in caused me to ponder. It has more to do with what happens in the home with the parents and the relationship between parents and children. Here's an interview of Ursula Burns by National Public Radio, May 12, 2012, that it speaks to this notion.
An American corporation best known for its association with paper is trying to turn itself around in the digital age. Leading Xerox through this transformation is a woman who's experienced her own share of change. Ursula Burns joined the company right out of college. As a top executive a decade ago, she helped pull Xerox back from the verge of bankruptcy. When she became CEO in 2009, Xerox was doing better, but the economy was struggling to come out of a deep recession. Ursula Burns is now the rarest of corporate leaders, an African-American and a woman heading a Fortune 500 company. She joined us to talk about her company and her career. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to be with you.
It is graduation season, and for a lot of graduates, their working life begins with an internship. You started as an intern 32 years ago at Xerox. Tell us who you were then, and would you have ever dreamed that you would be CEO of Xerox one day?
I was a pretty fresh, rough engineer, and I was born and raised in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, so I was Lower East Side of Manhattan mechanical engineer descending on this great American corporation called Xerox Corporation. And what I found there was an organization that accepted me for whom I was. They actually tried to round out some edges without taking away the person that they hired. You know, my impatience, my quote-unquote bravado, all of the, they actually accepted all of that. Now, I didn't think when I walked into the company that I would be the CEO. I did expect to be successful, though. My mother raised us to think that if we worked hard and if we put our end of the bargain in, it would work out okay for us. And I loved the place. They seemed to like me well enough. So a marriage was formed, and I've been there ever since.
You mentioned the Lower East Side, and back in 1980 approximately, it wasn't the fancy sort of East Village area that it is today.
No, the Lower East Side when I was growing up was the ghetto. It was tough. It was drug infested. So my mother created in this environment that wasn't great when you walked out the door. She created an environment that was just fine inside. And she spent a lot of money to send my sister, my brother, and I to Catholic school. It's the best education that we could get at that time. But when I think about it in hindsight, it was just fine. I was never wanting for encouragement, that's for sure.
I wonder then, was there a moment ever where you found that being a woman was a hurdle for you as you moved up?
Race and gender definitely came up occasionally in my life at work. But the bigger challenge that I had was age. I took roles earlier in my career than people expected. And so a lot of what I got was, do you actually know enough to do this? Gender and race, as you move up, this idea of looking the part becomes more of a challenge when you don't look the part. But, there's nothing I can do or wanted to do about being a black female. I kind of like both of those things. So at the end of the day, the people who were around me had to do a little bit more adjusting to that than I did. I did no adjusting to that. Now, I got beat up for doing bad things or not moving fast enough, but never for being a woman or for being black. It's just not a part of the way that we operated it. I benefited from that for sure. It was a great place to start.